Have you ever wished your pen was a pencil? No? Well, this week's ink had me double taking a time or two. Now, I'm not going to lie, I try to avoid gray inks on the channel because I never really know what to say when I'm reviewing them. But we're going to break with that today and take a look at Smoke Gray from Kaweco. And now I have to try to figure out what to say about it. I mean, on one hand, it's gray, but on the other hand, I keep wanting to call it silver. Either way though, every time I pulled out my sport to do the writing samples, I had to mentally recalibrate so I wouldn't keep thinking that I was writing with a pencil. And I think that is kind of the biggest problem with this ink, but we'll cover that a little bit later in the video. Here at the top though, I will say that if you're looking for an ink that has a nice graphite look to it with just a touch of silver, then this would be a good ink choice for you. Also, if you want a color that kind of reminds you of those 18% gray cards in photography, then yeah, this would be a good choice. Definitely though, let me know in the comments what you would use a gray ink like this for. If we were to believe popular media, then there are at least 50 shades of gray to be found. On display here though, I'm only really seeing 5. On the lighter side, we're seeing a nice cloud gray, and the mids on the left are presenting a nice solid gray. In the upper left, we're getting a good look at a nice iron gray, and it occasionally fades into a nice pewter gray. What I like though are those transition tones in the bottom left. There, we get an amazing fade from shadow into charcoal. I think if this ink showed these transition tones throughout, then your entire writing session would be a keeper from start to finish. As it is though, I find myself staying in the lighter mids on the left-hand side. Moving on to the dry times for Smoke Gray, I find the drying a little on the slow side, at least on TR. On Tomoe, we find ourselves drying by about the 16-second mark. When we look over at Rhodia though, we are completely dry by the 10-second mark. So it seems that this ink is lacking in the consistent dry times that we tend to see with the other Kaweco inks. As we move on over from dry time, I'm honestly unsure of how to feel on this one. After all, one of the key things I point out when looking at other inks is how good of a ghosting layer they leave behind. With this ink, it starts off as a ghosting layer, so there really isn't anywhere to go from there. Anyways, once we get the water off the page, what we are left with, well, I guess it's just a lighter shade of the ink that we already had. I'm not sure if what we can say here was color lift, or if anything else is going on, so I guess since it's at least recoverable, I'm gonna call it good. So let's move over to the Rhodia writing sample while I try to get my overall thoughts together about this ink. As a slow writer, and from a broad nib, this ink is thankfully starting over in the mids that we saw on the left ink blot. For me, that's gonna be a good thing. If it was any lighter, I would probably start to doubt that my pen was working correctly. As it is though, I find this one to be well behaved on Rhodia. I mean, I'm just barely losing line width while writing, so it's keeping my broad looking broad. I'm also not seeing any skipping or hard starting with this one, which is always a plus. The one thing we are missing here though is dynamic range. This is, it's staying in the midtones and not moving. I was one of those kids in school that wasn't happy with my pencils until the line was super dark gray. So with this ink reminding me of pencil lead, I feel that it misses that mark for me. The only difference here is that sharpening the nib will not fix that. Do not sharpen your nibs. I mean, like seriously, I cannot stress that enough. Never mind, let's move on over to Tomoe. And yeah, once we're over on Tomoe, the first thing that jumps out at me here is that we're moving into the darker tones. Still not as dark as I would like for it to be, for a gray, but better than what we were getting on Rhodia. We also start to get a good look at some of the dynamic range here. While it still isn't super dynamic, I'm at least seeing an attempt from the ink to hit those darker mids and make a try for the transition tones. Unfortunately though, with how dry Kaweco inks tend to be, I just don't feel the transitions are a realistic expectation out of anything that isn't a blade or stacked nib. Standard nib widths, they're just not going to get that job done. And even on Tomoe here, I'm doubting faster writers, and especially those with fine nibs, will ever leave the tones that we saw on the right-hand ink blot. And I guess that's the final nail for this ink for me. If you're looking for a different shade of gray, and this one just happens to fit the bill, then yeah, I think you would be happy. but me personally, I find it hard for an everyday writer to find this one appealing, and I'm glad I got it in cartridge form instead of wasting my money buying a bottle. And that's gonna do it for my look at Kaweco Smoke Gray. If you like the video, hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and consider becoming a patron to help support the Dog Treat and Coffee Fund. Until next time, don't drink the ink.